All right, so let's begin, and let's daven that the fruit of our learning should help to bring home the last of the hostages, protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael, all of the innocents, and bring a final end to our war. In Hirav Yameinu. And with that, let's proceed. So we've been focusing on this part of the Gemara about a statement by Shmuel that says, Lo halchu b'pikuach nefesh achar harov. So I'll just remind you that this came in the wake of, this statement comes in the wake of this Braita. And the Braita, which we went through a while ago, but I'm sure you'll all remember, talked about pikuach nefesh, right? That we're mefakech pikuach nefesh b'Shabbat, v'hazariz harez meshubach, ve'ein tzarich litol reshut mibeit din. And then the Braita gives several examples of pikuach nefesh. So the first one was, if a child falls into the sea, you're allowed to throw out a net to bring him up. And it repeats the same points that Hazariz Arezim Shubach, right? Whoever is zealous does it quickly, that's praiseworthy. You don't have to take permission from Beit Din, even though when you bring up the net, you'll be fishing out fish. You'll end up capturing fish. And then we had other ones. So we saw the next one, the tinok that falls into a pit, that you can dig a stair to get down into the pit. And then we had the child who was locked behind a door, and you can break down the door, even though you're going to be able to use the wood for kindling. And then we had this last one that we put out, Mechabin mafsikim mipnei hadleka b'Shabbat. We put out a fire, and also we put up a barrier in front of a fire on Shabbat. And again, Hazariz harez meshubach ve'en tzarich litol reshut mibeit din v'afal gav dekam memakech bakoche. Even though you'll be laying down coals, even if you do lay down coals, like you press down the coals, which then later on you'll be able to use after Shabbat for cooking. Okay, so that was the Braita. And then the Gemara went and explained why I need each of the cases. And that brought us to this statement of Shmuel. Now, you'll see why I mentioned this a little bit later, but the point is, we have this, so we're in this discussion of pikuach nefesh. We understand that you can go to extraordinary measures to save someone's life on Shabbat, extraordinary in the sense that you're allowed to be Mechalel Shabbat. In fact, you should be Mechalel Shabbat in order to be Mefakach Nefesh. And now we have this statement that says, Lo halchu b'pikuach nefesh achar harov. So Michael Werner, what does that mean?
We do not follow the majority in determining whether something is pikuach nefesh.
Not in the, what don't we follow the majority after?
Okay. So it depends on the context, but in the case that we're looking at, in the case of building collapse, even if there's a, but well, if there's a, if there's
Wait 1 second before you give the example. I just wanted you to translate it properly.
Okay.
Lo halchu b'pikuach nefesh achar harov. We don't go after the majority, not in determining if something's pikuach nefesh. We know if something is pikuach nefesh.
No, so we don't go after the majority in we don't know whose life we're going to be saving.
Okay, well, right, so that ends up being
Jew or
the
non-Jew.
case. All right, so we don't go at, in other words, so we'll put it this way. The statement of Shmuel is saying, if I have in front of me a case of pikuach nefesh, where some aspect of the pikuach nefesh is not clear, because maybe there is a majority, some kind of rove that would mitigate against me breaking Shabbat, being mefakech, pikuach nefesh on Shabbat. When there's some kind of a rove against that, Shmuel is saying, I ignore the rove, and I still am mefakech pikuach nefesh on Shabbat. And so then the Gemara wants to know, Heichi Dami. What, hey, Michael Werner, what does Heichi Dami mean?
What is the case?
Okay, so what is this case? So now we go and we offer three cases. So the first case, in other words, I want to know when is this statement of Shmuel, when is it pertinent? When is it active? When do I have to rely on it? So what's the first case? So go ahead and read this. Inema.
Inema de Tesha Yisrael v'goy echad benehu. Ruba Yisrael nimehu.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So if we have a case where there are 9 Jews and 1 Goy among them, the majority are Jews. So this is not the case that Shmuel is referring to.
Okay, what do the words inema mean?
So if we were to say,
If we were to say, that's what it means. Okay, so what's the point? If most of the people in this group are Jews, and what happened? What's the pikuach nefesh here?
we will learn that it's the collapse of a building.
Okay, well, the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara assumes that you know that. And that's how Rashi learns. The reason I mentioned the Braita, see, Rashi says, Inema Tisha Yisrael B'chad Nachri, V'nafla Mapolet al Echad Mehem. So that's the case that you were talking about. And a mapolet, some kind of a pile of rocks, falls on one of the people from this group. And Ein Yadua im Israel im Nachrihu. We don't know if it's the Jew, if it's a Jew that the rocks fell on, or a non-Jew that the rocks fell on. So as you say, the Gemara says, Ruba Yisrael who, most of them are Jews, and therefore what?
Shmuel's statement doesn't apply.
We don't need Shmuel's statement. It won't apply because it's not that it won't apply. It's not that it's not that it's wrong, but I don't need it because I do have a rove, right? I do have a rove, and if I'm going after the general principle of rove, then it would indicate to me that I have to dig out whomever is there, because 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a Jew. Okay, so so I talked about this last time. Let me talk about it again. So when we talk about, but I'm still developing this, trying to articulate it better and better each time. But when we talk about rov in halacha, so rov is a concept that I'm going to invoke when something isn't clear to me. That is, maybe there's a reality in front of me, but I can't determine the reality. So last time I gave the example of you have 100 apples that are chuling, and one apple that's truma falls among them, and they all look the same. They're all green apples. So I can't determine now. In other words, I know that there's 100 chulin. I know that there's one that's truma. I can't determine which is which. So what's the din? So the din there is that the rove tells me that all of these apples in front of me now have the din of chulin. I picked the 100 not arbitrarily because that's the din of Beetle Barov for Truma is one in one. It's 101. It has to be 100 of the Chulin and one Truma. That will be Batel. So there, the Rov is invoked not to tell me that they all began this scenario as Chulin, but now for halachic purposes, I consider all of them to be chulin. So that's how rov gets invoked in that case. So why did I invoke the rov? Because I can't figure out which is the apple that's truma. And I also gave the example of what if I had 100, let's say I had 99 green apples that were chulin and one red apple that falls into it that's truma. So there, even though the rove is chulin, or even if it's 100 green apples, even though the rove is chulin, but I can pick out the red apple, so I know which one is truma. So there's no need for me to invoke rove. So rove is going to be invoked when I can't figure out what the reality is. So I have to have some halachic way of determining the status of these apples. And then on the other end, and this is all based on this idea that Chazal learn out from Psukim that that we go after the rov. It's based on the pasuk Acharei Rabim Lahatot. And so, and the other example that I gave, the second example I gave is, what if I have a court case, and every court case has a minimum of 3 judges? So let's say there's a court case, and 2 judges rule in favor of the plaintiff, and one judge rules against the plaintiff. So the halacha is, I go after the rov, right? I'm going to go in favor of the plaintiff because 2 judges out of 3 ruled for the plaintiff. But it's not because I don't know, and it's not because the rov now has subsumed the third opinion. I know what the third opinion is. It didn't go away just because I'm going to paskin like the 2 judges and not the 1 judge. It's still there, but it won't carry the psak. It doesn't carry the day because I have a general rule that tells me that I go after the rov. So there I'm invoking rov, not because of any safek. There's no doubt. I know exactly who paskined what. I can point to each judge and tell you what each of them paskined. That's not the problem. It's not a problem of doubt. There's a problem that I don't know. I'm sorry. The problem is that I didn't get a unanimity of opinion. Not everybody agreed. So then I have to invoke this rule of rov to tell me that nonetheless I'm going to use the majority opinion. And so,
and ask a question.
Sure.
Yeah, there is a difference between the judges and the apples. In the case of the judges, it's a rov of opinions, how to use the halacha, how to apply it. And in the case of the apples, they are the object of the halacha. It's not the same. Maybe the halacha says you should still go according to the rov, but it's not the same situation.
Yes, so you're absolutely correct. It's not the same, and you make a good distinction. But yes, nonetheless, why am I talking about rov in both cases? Because again, rov is a principle that I'm going to apply either in the first case I'm going to apply it because I can't determine the reality. And in the case of the judges, I can determine the reality of the psak, but I have to I can determine the reality of the different opinions, and I can point to every one and tell you what their opinion is. But you might have thought that if I don't have a unanimous opinion, that I don't have any kind of psak. So I need the Rov to tell me that even though there are differing opinions, and even though I will add in, even though both opinions are completely legitimate halachically, right? They're both based in halachic reasoning, but nonetheless, I have to make a psak. So I'm going to go after the Rov to determine the psak. In other words, so that it becomes, in both cases, Rov, maybe the Mechaneh Meshutaf, right? The common denominator is that the Rov is something that I have to default to when my first tier, my first level of determination won't determine an outcome. So in the case of the apples, my first level of determination is I don't know, right? There's a safek. I literally don't know what the reality is. And so I have to default to Rov, and not because, well, not for any other reason, but now for halachic purposes, the truma apple has become chulin. Even though a minute ago it was truma, now it becomes chulin. And in the case of the judges, I don't have to change anybody's opinion, but since I can't determine the halacha based on the halachic arguments, then I have to default to Rov. So I'm going to invoke Rov as a general rule. I'm going to invoke Rov when there isn't another way of determining an outcome. And so now we come to our case. So Michael did the first case. The first case, right?
Another question.
Sure.
Maybe I probably know the answer, but
No.
if you go to a rabbi to decide, I don't know if this tarnegoled is kosher or not, and then you go to another rabbi, and the one says it's kosher, the other says it's not. Then they go to a third one. Is this allowed? Can you? Is it again according to the Rov, or you have to accept the first one you went to, the first decision of the first rabbi you went to?
It's a good question. It's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. You're not really allowed to ask a second opinion. You're not really.
Although if you would ask three rabbis, maybe the two other ones would decide the other way. Yes.
So I wanted to. I'm giving you that as a kind of a straight answer. It can be more complicated because and there is a lot of discussion about this. But I'll tell you, in principle, if you go to ask a shaila of a rabbi, in other words, and if you're asking him to give you a psak, you're going to him to get a psak, then in principle, you're not supposed to ask anybody else. If you do ask somebody else and they disagree, you're still supposed to go after the first halachic opinion, although the reason I say it's complicated is because let's say you went and you asked your local rabbi and he gave a psak and you didn't think it was right, and you went and you asked Gadol Hador, right? Someone who is recognized as a far superior opinion. So then there's reason to say you might go after him. But I'll tell you, Ma'aseh Shahaya, I'll give you an actual example from my own life. So a long time ago, this must be like, I don't know, 20 years ago, somebody got in touch with me about a pair of tefillin that I wrote a few years prior, and they had them opened and they were checked, and they found what they thought was a psul. And I'll tell you what the psul is. It's a little obscure, but if you can imagine a chaf sofit, and below on the next line, going into the bottom of the chaf, like the area of the chaf sofit, were 3 tagin, right? 3 crowns. So Sofer, not a posek, but a Sofer looked at it and he said it's pasul because the tagin aren't allowed to go into the chaf sofit. So I told them I'll replace them, but I wasn't convinced that that's a psul. In fact, I knew that it wasn't a psul, and I went to Rav Scheinberg, Zichrono Livracha, who was recognized as one of the Gedolei Hador, and he agreed with me. But I told him the whole story, and so he agreed that I should replace them because the first sofer said they were pasul. Even though this sofer lumat Rav Scheinberg, you wouldn't be able to compare. And then I asked Rav Scheinberg, would it be all right though for me to sell the first pair to somebody else? And he said, yeah, you could sell them to somebody else. In other words, the decision of the first sofer only went so far as his decision vis-a-vis that particular customer. It's not that Rav Scheinberg was saying that the halacha is like him, but he said, in other words, he recognized that it's a legitimate opinion, even though he rejected it. So it was legitimate enough that I could sell them to somebody else. So Maaseh Shahaya. Anyway, let's go back to this though. So Michael Werner. By the way, Michael Schwartz is away this week. He told us last week he wouldn't be here.
And I don't know if I'm going to last that much longer.
Okay, well,
So
you'll do your best because otherwise you'll miss the best part.
I'll miss the clincher.
Well, in a way, yes, because we spent a lot of time on this, but we still haven't finished it. All right, but I'll understand it. If you need to bow out, I really understand. It's fine. Okay, so you gave the first case. So we're trying to figure out a case where I can invoke Shmuel's principle that lo halchu b'pikuach nefesh achar harov. So the first case is if I have 9 Jews and 1 non-Jew, and a mapolet falls on one of them, and I don't know which one, so most of them are Jews. So I would normally invoke Rov. So the Rov would tell me that I have to dig out whoever is there, even on the chance that it's not a Jew. So I don't need Shmuel's opinion for that case. And what's the next case? Palga, half and half. If they're half and half, what?
Half Jews, half non-Jews.
So if it's half Jews and half non-Jews, then fake nefashot la'akel. And what does that mean?
Meaning that we don't invoke Shmuel's rule here either, because there's another rule that takes precedence.
And what's that rule?
If there is a doubt about Pikuach Nefesh, we ruled leniently.
Yes, and so what would be the leniency here?
Leniency here is that there's a 50-50 chance of it being a Jew or non-Jew, so it's like 50% chance of the principle.
What's the leniency? What am I being lenient about?
Even though we don't know if we'll be saving a Jew or a non-Jew, we're saying that Pikuach Nefesh applies.
So what's the leniency?
So Suffolk, I guess Suffolk would mean.
It's a simple answer. When I say I'm being
the leniency is that we say this is Pikuach Nefesh and therefore we break Shabbat.
That's it. That's what we're looking for. That's the leniency, that we're going to break Shabbat for Pikuach Nefesh. Ela diika tisha goyim v'Yisrael echad. So rather, it must be a case of 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew. And so, Michael Werner, what happened here? What's the case?
There are 9 non-Jews, and 1 Jew. Mapolet now buries one of them. And we still assume that this is pekuach nefesh.
Right, we're
And
still good.
therefore we break Shabbat.
Therefore, we're going to break Shabbat because of what principle?
We don't go after the rov in determining.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent. In other words, this would be the case where I'm going to invoke Shmuel's principle that the pikuach nefesh lo hachu achar rov. And so what was the rov here?
9 non-Jews.
There were 9 non-Jews, so that should inform me that if I go after the rov, there are 9 non-Jews and only 1 Jew, and I go after the rov, then I wouldn't be Michal Shabbos to save whoever's life is under this pile of rocks. So this tells me this would be the case that I'm going to invoke Shmuel. So now, what does the Gemara say? Hanami pshita. What does that mean?
This is obvious.
This is also, Nami is also, this is also obvious. Why? Continue.
Dehave le kavua, v'kol kavua kemechetza al mechetza dame.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So this is a group. This is a group where they were, together in one courtyard. And in all such cases where they're actually like a bounded group. If this is a bounded group, in all cases where this is a bounded group, we rule it as if it were half and half.
Okay, so right.
Say this is half and half.
Okay, so right, because we say this is a case of kavua. So you're saying kavua is bounded. There are two aspects to kavua here. So one is that they're in a specific area, right? They're in a chatzer, and the other is what makes it kavua is that there are 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew, and in principle, right, I could identify each one of them. So this is the case that falls, as it were, between the case of the apples and the case of the judges. What do we mean? Because
in the case of the apples, there's no visible way to draw distinction.
Okay.
And in the case of the judges, it's absolutely clear.
And what is the case here then? How is this different?
We can identify each person, but we don't know which one is buried.
Okay, so in other words, in principle, each one of them still has their identity. It's just that now I can no longer, because of circumstances, I can no longer pick out the Jew from the non-Jews. So yes.
There is another very fundamental difference. For the judges, you go according to the rov, and for the people under the mapolet, you don't go according to the rov. It's not the same. It's just the opposite.
No. So here, no. So the point. So yes, you're right. But this is the point. The point that the Gemara is making is, a moment ago, we wanted to say, when we had a case of 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew, and a mapolet falls in one of them, and I don't know which one, the rov the assumption is that rov would tell me I'm not Mechal Shabbos for this. But Shmuel's statement says, since we don't go after the rov, I would be Mechal Shabbos. But now the Gemara says, no, Hanami Pshita, that case that you gave of 9 Goyim and 1 Yisrael, that's also an obvious case, meaning what does it mean it's obvious? I don't need Shmuel for this case either. Why not? Because this is a case of kavua. And in kavua, I consider kavua to be like a 50-50 split, like a 50-50 chance. So now we're just explaining what Michael Werner was doing. He was explaining what's the kviyut here. So we're saying that what's kavua here. So let's look at how Rashi says this. So Rashi says, Eladika tisha nochrim v'chad Yisrael v'ashma'ina da'afal gav deruba nochrim. And now it tells us that even though most of the people in this group are non-Jews, Chayshin and Shemi Yisrael hu mefakhin. So we're worried that maybe one of them is a Jew, and I will uncover the rocks for him. And so that goes like Shmuel, but Hanami Pshita, this is also obvious. Why? To Kaimalan kol kavua kemechza mechzadami. To Nafkalan besanhedrin v'ketubot amiva arav prat zorek even lago. So I'm not going to go through the whole sugi again. We spent, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we looked at the Gemara and Sanhedrin to understand this, but I'm giving you the summary. Michael Werner is also giving you the summary that the idea is that here, there's a point in time where I could identify everybody, and now it's not that they're all mixed up, it's that they're not all in front of me. So I no longer have them as an immediate reference. And so they're not like the apples and they're not like the judges, because I know that there's a rove of non-Jews and there's only one Jew, but because I can't pick the Jew out, I consider this case to not be a case of rove, and I consider it to be mechza, consider it to be half and half. Once I say it's mechza, then what will I say? I'll say what I said a moment ago. Palgu palga safek nefashot la'akel. Okay. So the Gemara then says, okay, lo tzricha. No, I still need it. I still need. So I haven't found a case yet for Shmuel. So the Gemara says, no, I still need Shmuel's statement, the Parush l'chatzer acheret, where he departed to another chatzer, another courtyard. Mahu detema, the farish meruba parish. So what would you say? That anything or anyone who departs from a group, my assumption is that he departed from the rove. So this is another klal about rove. That if you had a group of rove, you have a group that's a majority of one identity, and one of them departs from that group, and now I can't determine. I'm looking at the thing that departed, maybe, but I can't determine what its original identity was. I'm going to assume that its original identity was part of the rove. So, so here, Shmuel's statement comes to teach us that if one of the people departed, so there were 10 people in a group, in a chatzer, they were kavua, meaning I could identify all of them, and they were in a specific place, but then one of them departed and went to another chatzer, and then the mapolet fell, and now I can't find the other people to determine who's under the pile of rocks. So I'll say kol kavua kemechza mechza. I'm sorry, I'll say I can't say kol kavua kemechza mechza dami because it's no longer kavu. Whoever left their kviyut. They left their place of being fixed in a certain place, and so now they've departed from the rove. So I shouldn't be mefakech et agal. It shouldn't be mechal Shabbos for them. According to Shmuel, nonetheless, I'm going to be mefakech et agal. So that's where we got up to last week. So now we're up to this. Ini. Is that so? So, Paul, why don't you read? V'ha'amar Rabbi Asi.
ואמר רבי אסי, אמר רבי יוחנן, 9 גויים וישראל אחד, באותה חצר מפקחים. בחצר האחרת אין מפקחים. לקשיא, הדפרוש כולהו. הדפרוש מקצתהו.
Okay. So what does all this mean? What did Rabbi Yochanan?
Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, if you have 9 goyim and 1 Jew in one hatzer, how you say in English?
Courtyard. We say courtyard.
Court?
We say a courtyard.
Courtyard.
Yeah.
In one courtyard, then you save whoever was under the mapolet, yes, like the preceding case, yes. But if the goy is in another courtyard, then you don't save him.
Okay, so stop. So what does it mean? So Botach Hatzer Mefaklim.
Because you don't see, it's like the green apples and the red apples, and they are all green. But if they are in different courtyards, then you can put them, it's like the green apples and the red one. Because you can now, you know who is who.
No, so that's the thing. Actually, we still don't know. We still don't know because, okay, so let's go back. And this part of the sugya is very tricky, and they're different. They're actually diametrically opposed ways of learning it. We're going to learn it the way Rashi learns it for the moment. So Rashi said about the case, the case that we said is tzricha, that the parush lechatzer acheret. This was to uphold Shmuel's statement. So Rashi says lo tzricha the parush lechatzer acheret. V'sham nafla al echad mapolet. Right. So Rashi. So the question is, who went into the other chatzer? So we had 10 people, 9 goyim and 1 Jew, and then somebody went into the other chatzer. So
but the Gemara doesn't say who went there.
Right. So the question is, who went in? So what are the possibilities?
The possibilities, it's 9 chances out of 10 that it was a Jew, and 1 chance out of 10 that it wasn't.
Okay, let me put it this way. In other words, I say, what's the possibility of who went in? So the possibility is, if I understand what you're saying, so you're saying, you're assuming that, and this could be the case, one of them left the group in Chatzer Aleph and went to Chatzer Bet.
Yes.
Sham nafla hamapolet, and then the mapolet fell on this person in Chatzer Bet.
The question is if you know if it was a Jew or it was a goy who went there.
Right. So
if
we
you don't know. It's the same case as before. There's no difference.
No, but now it's different. Why? Because now we'll say, Kol de Parish Meruba Parish. And Rashi explains, Kol de Parish Meruba Parish B'midi Denaidi. We say, when do we say anything that's separated out from a group came from the rov? If it's something that's on the move, something that moves, something that was in geographically in one place and went to a geographically different place. And the hacha, but here in this case of the 9 non-Jews and the 1 Jew, and one of them goes into another chatzer, we don't say that. Afalgav the prishatan kulhu naidi. Even though when they departed, all of them were moving. So Rashi seems to think that what happened, that you had this group in Chatzer Aleph, and then they all departed and went to the second Chatzer. And then the Mapolet fell.
All?
So that he says the Beprishatan Kulhu Naidi, he says all of them were on the move. So Rashi's difficult, right? Because if they really all went into in the next Chatzer, so
And
then
then there's the same situation as if they were in the Chatzer.
yeah,
The first-
so really nothing changed, right? In other words, if all of them moved, so now they're all kavua in a second Chatzer. So
Same case as before. It doesn't matter in which chatzer they are. They all go to there.
right, we would still say kol kavua kamechzal mechzadami. So it makes more sense to say Tosfos brings up that question. 1 second. Let me change the screen here for a second. I'm going to hold off on this, Tosfos. So I'll hold off on this. So let's understand, though, maybe only one of them, or less than the whole, right? Let's say, but let's take the other extreme. The other extreme would be, what's the case? The case is that
9 moved and 1 stayed.
well, I'm going to take the other one. One move. One
1
move,
moved, 9 stayed.
and 9 stayed. And for some reason, though, I can't see the other 9 now. Maybe after that happened, after the Mapolet fell, then the other 9 scattered. And I don't see, or they, now they moved. But
So you don't know who moved, if it was a Jew or
right.
a Goy.
And so since I don't know who moved, I say, Kol de Parish, Meruba Parish. Anybody who departs from, departs, who separates from a group, the understanding is that he came from the Rove. And so under using that as the rule, I wouldn't be Mefakech Hatagal, because most of them were non-Jews. And that's why I need Shmuel to say, B'pikuach nefesh lo hachu achar Rove. But now the Gemara says, but I have this statement by Rabbi Yochanan, where Rabbi Yochanan says, if you have 9 goyim and 1 Jew, באותה חצר מפקחים, בחצר אחרת אין מפקחים. So what does it mean now, בחצר אחרת אין מפקחים?
I'm sorry, I was out.
What's the difference between the chatzerot?
Well, so wait a second. So exactly. So what is Rabbi Yochanan saying? And why does the Gemara considers Rabbi Yochanan's statement to be a kasha on Shmuel? So Shmuel says, "B'pikuach nefesh lo achu acharov," and what we wanted to say, when will I invoke that? In the case where I had Tisha Goyim, the Chag Yisrael, in one chatzer, and then one of them parash, right? One of them departed, went to a different chatzer, and then a mapolet fell on him. So if I went after Rov, I wouldn't be mefakech, but Shmuel says I don't go after Rov, so I'm mefakech. But Rabbi Yochanan says, B'ota chatzer mefakchin, b'chatzer acheret ein mefakchin. So what does he mean, B'ota chatzer mefakchin, and what does he mean, b'chatzer acheret ein mefakchin?
One Chatzer makes a group, groups people together, and if there's another Chatzer, then it doesn't make a group.
No, that's not what he's saying. B'ota chatzer. No, basically I set it up for you. All you have to do is plug in what we do.
I know I was dimmed out. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I set it up for you. Again, we said, what's the case where I'm going to invoke Shmuel? What cases? When does Shmuel's din, that pikuach nefesh lo achu acharov, when does that apply?
It applies when it applies when the person who's the Mopalit is in a different Chatzer, and the rest of the people have scattered.
Okay, so Yeah, so that's when it applies. That's when I need it, because why? Why do I need to say b'pikuach nefesh lo hachu achar rov in that case?
Because there's really no way of determining
Because the rov would tell me what?
that the rove would say that this is not, it's most likely not a Jew,
And therefore what?
and therefore we need the rule that the rule would apply, since we still would assume that this pekuach nefesh as if it were a Jew, and dig the person out on Shabbat.
Okay, so that's the way that's what we wanted to say, that Shmuel must hold that. That, in other words, I need Shmuel to tell me this case. I need Shmuel to tell me the case when there were 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew in one chatzer, and then one of them is poresh and goes to another chatzer. And in the other chatzer, the mapolet falls. So the rov would tell me that I shouldn't be mefakech et agal, but Shmuel says, "Pikuach nefesh lo achu acharov," so I am mefakech et agal. Now Rabbi Yochanan says, "B'chatzer, b'otah chatzer mefaklin." In the same chatzer, we're mefaklin. What does he mean in the same chatzer? What is in the same chatzer?
They're all together in the same chatzer, no?
So if they're all together, if the 9 non-Jews and the 1 Jew are all together in the same chatzer, and a mapolet falls on them, on one of them, then I'm mefakeach. But b'chatzer acheret ein mefaklin. So what does it mean b'chatzer acheret ein mefaklin?
If the victim of the mapol is in a different chatzer.
Yeah. In other words, that's what I mean. I set it up for you. This is the exact. The Gemara is assuming that Rabbi Yochanan is talking about the precise case that we just said that Shmuel would say that we don't go after the rov, and it looks like Rabbi Yochanan says no, we still go after the rov, because the chatzer acheret ein mefaklin, meaning if one of them went off to another chatzer, and I don't know whether it was the Jew or the non-Jew, then ein mefaklin. Because why? Because kol de parish meruba parish. That would seem to be what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. So that's the Gemara's question. Ini, is it so? In other words, is it so that I'm going to apply Shmuel to this case of the one who goes from one chatzer to another chatzer out of the group of 10? After all, Rabbi Yochanan said in that exact case, ein mefaklin. So the Gemara answers, so in other words, so I have now a contradiction between Shmuel, or what I think Shmuel would have said, and what Rabbi Yochanan actually says. So the Gemara says, lo kasha, there's no contradiction. Had the parush kulhu, had the parush miktsatayhu. One case is where all of them left the chatzer and went to another chatzer, and one is when part of them, some of them, left. So the Gemara, before we understand exactly what this means, we understand what the Gemara is trying to do is to say that the case that I set up for Shmuel to invoke Shmuel's principle is not the same case as the case that Rabbi Yochanan is talking about. A moment ago, I thought they were the same case. And then there is a contradiction. So I want to answer it by saying, Shmuel was talking about one case, and Rabbi Yochanan is talking about a different case. So now the task we have in front of us is to understand which is which. Who is the one who would say had the parush kulhu, as opposed to the one who would say had the parush miktsatayhu? Okay, since everyone's tired, I'm going to.
I'm sorry.
No, but if you have a group and you separate the group and you
Yes.
don't know you don't know the identity of each one who went to the first subgroup or the second subgroup. So it's still like a group if you don't know the identity. But if you do know the identity, you have two separate subgroups. It's okay. But you have to decide if you know the identity or if you don't know the identity.
Okay, so let's see how Rashi says this. Let's see how Rashi learns. Had the parush kulhu, had the parush miktzatayhu. Rashi says, had the parush kulhu. Paul, why don't you read? Ho'il?
הואיל והתחזק ישראל והאי חצר שנפלה בו מפולת, מפקחים, ואף על גב דניידי לי לא אזלינן בתר רובה.
Okay. Ruba, yeah.
רובה.
So, can you translate this?
If all of Israel went to the courtyard in which
Not all of it. What does it mean, Yitchazek Yisrael? Ho'il v'yitchazek Yisrael b'hai chatzer shenafla bo mapolet. Okay, it's tricky. I'm gonna do it. Since the Jew hitchazek, meaning he had a chazaka of being in the group all together, right? Ho'il v'yitchazek Yisrael so in other words, Hadaparush Kulhu means the entire group moved. So we have this group, 9 goyim, 1 Jew. They're in Chatzer Aleph. Then they all move to Chatzer Bet.
All the Jews, all the 9?
All of the 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew, all 10 of them go to the second Chatzer. So
why does he say Israel?
Because itchazek Yisrael b'hai chatzer shenafla bo mapolet. In other words, if all of them went, there's a chazaka that one of them is a Jew. So let's we'll say it out. I'm looking at I'm the observer. I see a group in front of me in Chatzer Aleph of 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew. And then they all pick up and go next door to the next Chatzer. So, as far as I know, one of them is still a Jew. It looks to me like the entire group moved. So, Itchazek Yisrael b'hai Chatzer shenafla bo mapolet. So there's a Jew, there's a chazaka that a Jew is still in this group that's in the second Chatzer.
No,
So,
that's obvious. If they all went there, nothing
it is
changed. Nothing changed.
Exactly, Paul, exactly. That's the point. Because nothing changed. Except what? What would I in some Havamina, I might think Afal Gav Denaidi, even though they moved. In other words, because what was I saying before? That when they're all standing in one place, then I say Kol Kavua Kemechza Mechzadami. So now you might make a mistake and think, but now they all moved, so they're not Kavua anymore. But the point is no, because all of them moved, that kviyut still stands in the next Chatzer.
It's just a translation of all the elements.
Yes,
translate.
It's been transported now into the next Chatzer. Afal Gav Denaidi, even though they moved, Lo Azlin and Bataruba, I still won't go after the Rov. So Rashi is saying I don't go after the rov, so that would line up with Shmuel's statement. So it would mean that Shmuel would I would still need Shmuel for the case where the entire group moved from Chatzer Aleph to Chatzer Bet. Had parush miktsatayu, but Rabbi Yochanan is talking about a case where they didn't all move. V'lo yedainan, that some of them went. V'lo yedainan, we don't know. Ihava Yisrael b'hai chatzer. Now we don't know if there's a Jew in the second chatzer. In that case, azlin bataruba. There, I'm going to go after the rov. Ho'il v'lo yitchazek, because now there isn't a chazaka that a Jew is in the second chatzer. So, in other words, the Gemara answers this seeming contradiction between the way I learned a moment ago about the Parush Chatzer Acheret, and I said that was talking, that would, the case of Parush Chatzer Acheret is the case I need in order, I need Shmuel to invoke Shmuel for that case, and that seemed to contradict what Rabbi Yochanan said, right? So we said in the first case, right, again, the Parush Chatzer Acheret, I need a case where there were nine goyim and one, wait, 1 second. Can you still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Because my screen froze for a second. Hold on. It's actually still giving me a problem. 1 second.
No interruption.
Okay. So it went like this. I had 9 non-Jews. I had 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew, B'Chatzer Aleph. And then I said, if one of them went to another Chatzer, then I would need Shmuel. So now what I'm saying, I would need Shmuel to tell me that I don't go after the rov. And then I had Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, if that group is all in the same chatzer, I'm mifakech et agal. Because why? Because there it's simple, because it's a rov. But if they're not all there in that chatzer, then ein mifaklim. So now I'm saying that Rabbi Yochanan means, what he means is, if one of the people from the group went to another chatzer, I wouldn't be mefakech et agal. And now Rashi is saying the way I have to understand the first case is if the entire group went to the other case, to the other chatzer, I would still have to be mefakech et agal. Those are the two cases. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. And what I'm going to do, we're going to revisit this because I'm going to show you different, we'll see how it ends up in Psak. There's a Machoket Rishonim about how to understand this Gemara. So I read you with the way Rashi understood it. Had parush kulhu means in the case where where the entire group moved from Chatzer Aleph to Chatzer Bet, I am mefakech et agal, and that's the case. The Gemara is saying that would be the case of where I invoke Shmuel. That even though all of them moved, I'm still mefakech et agal, despite the fact that the rov are non-Jews. But if only one of them moved, Then I invoke what Rabbi Yochanan says. What Rabbi Yochanan says, had the parush miktzah, when Rabbi Yochanan says, b'chatzer acheret ein mefakrin, what he means is if only one of the group went to another chatzer, then that's parush miktzatayhu, ve'ein mefakrin. And then I go after the rov, and I'm not mechal Shabbos. That's how Rashi learns. So now we're gonna throw in another kasha, and for this kasha, we have to look at a Mishnah in Masechet Machshirin, which I'll show you. So, oh, wait a second. No, yeah. Okay, Machshirin is a Masechet in Seder Taharot, and it primarily deals with, right, Machshirin is a concept that any fruit, meaning any kind of food, whether it's food or vegetable, grows from the ground, is not mekabel tuma unless it has come into contact with one of 7 liquids. But so obviously one of the liquids is water. And there's another tonight. There's another condition. It has to be picked. In other words, as long as the fruit or whatever is still connected to its source, so rain can fall on it. It's not mekabel tuma. But if I pick it, let's say it's an apple, I pick the apple, and then water came on it. Now it's mekabel tuma. It's not tameh, but it could become tameh. So that's my introduction to Masechet Machshirin. But here I'm actually going to deal with nothing of the sort. This is part of a wider context that's brought earlier in the chapter. We're just going to deal with this one Mishnah. So, Michael Werner, if you're still awake enough, I want you to read this Mishnah.
מצב התינוק מושלך. אם רוב נוכרים נוכרי, ואם רוב ישראל מחצה למחצה ישראל. רבי יהודה אומר, הולכים אחר הרוב המשליכים.
Okay. So I know that you don't know what this means really, but I want you to translate the words, and then we'll see what it means.
And so if you find in it, and then we'll pull it.
No, don't try to.
Okay. If you find in it an infant mushalach, trapped.
No, mushlach. Lahashlich means to throw. So it means someone who's like pushed aside or thrown to the side.
Okay, so you find in it an infant that has been pushed to one side. If majority are non-Jews, we assume that the infant's a non-Jew. And if the majority are Jews, then we assume that the infant is a Jew. And if since half and half, we assume that he's a Jew. Rabbi Yehuda says we go after the rove of the people who've been pushed over to one side.
Okay, very good. So what we're talking about here is if you find a child who's mushlach, so for our purposes, we'll say he's abandoned, right? Mushlach could be abandoned. You find an abandoned child on sitting out on the street in the city. So if most of the people in the city are non-Jews, we consider him to be a non-Jew. And if most of the people in the city are Jews, we consider him to be a Jew. And if it's half and half, we consider him to be a Jew. So now the question would be, certainly a question that begs itself is, for what purpose do I consider him to be Jewish or not Jewish? What difference does it make to me if he's Jewish or non-Jewish? What difference would it make?
Well, since we've been discussing Pekuach Nefesh, we assume that this is the case.
Actually, here, okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your statement. Finish. Go ahead.
I mean, given that we look at Pekuach Nefesh, we might guess that this is another instance of Pekuach Nefesh.
Okay, and let's say it is. So then what difference would it make if he's a Jew or a non-Jew?
Because Pekuach Nefesh applies only if he's a Jew.
Okay, so let's take your case. So let's say this is a case of a kid, I find him in the street, and then before I can go up and say anything to him, a mapolet falls on him. This poor, very unfortunate child.
This is sort of like this sort of Lemony Snicket.
Yeah, really.
Abandoned, a building falls on him.
So let's say this building falls on him on Shabbos. So if the city is mostly non-Jews, then I'm not going to be digging him out. If the city's mostly Jews, I will be digging him out. And if it's half and half, I'll also be digging him out because Safek Nefashot don't count. All right? So that's one possibility where it will make a difference whether he's a Jew or whether he's a non-Jew. Go ahead.
If he's dead, they are all corpses, and you want the Jew to be buried as a Jew, you have to know who is the Jew. That's what's going on now. With Asa. You are not going to say, "Oh, there are so many Arabs there." They found the Hadar Goldin. He was among other Mechablim.
Right.
And they did a big job to pick him out.
Yes.
They could have picked out anybody.
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. So here also it would be, all right, that would be a relevant question.
I mean, do we even need the added layer of the Mapol? If a child's been abandoned, then his life is in danger.
Well, here, let me finish. Let's look for a moment at what the Bartanura says. So Bartanura says, "Imrov nachrim nachri, umutar la'achilon nevelot utrefot shkatzim uremasim biyadayim." In other words, there are other reasons that I may want to know if he's a Jew or a non-Jew, and one is if he's not Jewish, then I can feed him treif. But yadayim meaning directly. In other words, I can actually personally give him non-kosher food. So there's an abandoned child, he's on the street, and I want to feed him. And let's say tray food, I mean, for whatever reason, maybe tray food is more accessible, maybe it's cheaper. I want to know if I can feed him treif or if I have to feed him kosher. So if Rov is if Rov of the city is Nachrim, I assume he's a Nachri, I can feed him treif. Being Rov Yisrael, but if most of the city are Jews, then I consider him to be a Jew. And then there's another nafkamina, the Chayavim lachzir lo avedato ki Yisrael. And then, now he becomes, just a person in the city, and I recognize him as a Jew, and he lost something, and I found it. Now I am bound to return his lost object, which I'm not bound to do for a non-Jew. Ravuta kamashmalan. So this teaches us. It teaches us something that we didn't know before, that what? Motziin mamon miyad Yisrael shezachabo, v'orminan uki mamon achazkate shezachabo ad demaiti hayach hayach raya shu Yisrael. Okay, that's a little technical. I'll just say it quickly. It's not so important for us to understand. But the point of what he's saying is, why is it such a chiddush to say that I have to be machzira veidah? Because I could have said, here, this kid actually can't prove that he's a Jew. It's just my assumption that he's a Jew because of rov. But if he can't prove that he's a Jew, then maybe I'll invoke another principle, which is I don't remove property from somebody unless I have a proof. In this case, we would say that unless he can prove that he's a Jew, and I have an obligation to return his Avedah to him, then he doesn't have a claim on me. So the chiddush of the Mishnah is that nonetheless, even though he can't prove that he's a Jew, and it's just because of rov that I assume that he's a Jew, I still treat him like a Jew, even in this case of being machzir Avedah. All right. Anyway, that's not so. We don't have to get into all of that. And in fact, I'm going to leave off the next Barton roof in a moment, but let's go back now to our Gemara. So, but we could understand now, because of what Michael Werner introduced us a moment ago, that maybe also for this question of Pikuach Nefesh, I want to know. So now I want to know. So at this point, we say, Umi Amar Shmuel Hachi. Did Shmuel really say this? In other words, did Shmuel really come out with a statement that said that when it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, I don't go after the Rov? Because after all, we learned in a Mishnah that we just read, Matzah ba tinok mushlach. Imrov goyim goy, imrov Yisrael Yisrael, mechza mechza Yisrael. The Amar Rav. So now on that part of the Mishnah, Rav said, Lo shanu ela lahachyoto. We didn't learn that Mishnah except to keep him alive. It's right to. So in other words, I didn't, that in the case where it's Rov Yisrael, I consider this abandoned child to be a Yisrael. Rav says the only applicable case is Lahachyoto. It's to keep him alive. So that would be a case of, let's say, Pikuach Nefesh. In other words, if it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, that's what the Mishnah means, that I have to keep him alive because Rov Yisrael, I consider him to be Yisrael. But what? Aval Yachso, lo. But to trace his family, no. So what does that mean? This is, okay, this is, you know what? It's almost time to finish, and I need to spend a little bit more time on this question of Yuchasin, which is a Mishnah in the beginning of the fourth parak of Kiddushin, which I also have teed up, but I'm not going to do it now because it'll take too long. But B'kitzur, the question that's going to come up, again, the Gemara here is bringing up another circumstance where it's relevant to know if somebody's Jewish or not Jewish, and what's that other circumstance? For yichus meaning if the kid is a Jew, then I can treat him as a Jew. If I'm not sure if he's a Jew, maybe it's a girl. I'm not sure if she's a Jew. It could be a boy or a girl, and then that will have ramifications for whom they can marry. Right? So I found an abandoned child, and not on that day, but maybe 10 years from now, they're going to get married. I need to know, are they Jewish or are they not Jewish? So Rav says, when I say Rov Yisrael, Yisrael, That's for keeping him alive. That's for pikuach nefesh. But if you ask me, is he considered a Jew for all intents and purposes, including yichus? Then no, I don't consider him to be a Jew ad kedei kach. U'Shmuel Omar l'fakeach alav et agal. Shmuel says it's only to be mefakech alav et agal. So I only need to know if he's a Jew. I only consider him to be a Jew for the question of whether or not I dig him out on Shabbat. And so what's the problem? And I'll leave it with this. A moment ago, I said that what did Shmuel say about pikuach nefesh?
We don't go after the rove.
And what's the case of this kid here?
We just
We do go according to the law.
We go. It seems that we're going after the rov. Shmuel mar l'fakech alav et agal. I only consider him to be a Jew to be mefakech alav et agal. And so, if it's to be mefakech alav et agal, so what does it mean? That only if rov Yisrael. But what if the rov is goyim? Then I wouldn't be mefakech alav et agal. I think I lost both of you.
I'm here.
Okay. It's okay. We're going to have to do this again. I urge you all to read this again. But remember, just like Michael, you said a moment ago, Shmuel says, "B'pikuach nefesh, we don't go after the rov." So what if I have a case of an abandoned child in a city that's mostly Nachri? The
So
Mishnah
according to
says
Shmuel, you should consider him as a Jew. Yep.
you
The
should
possibility
consider
that he is a Jew.
you should consider the possibility. You should consider that he's a Jew.
For the
And
purpose
yet,
of the
Shmuel says on this Mishnah that when the Mishnah says Rov Yisrael, that's what I'm mifakech alav et agal. Shmuel is saying, I only am mifakech alav et agal when there's a Rov that's Jewish, and that's why I consider him to be Jewish. But if it's mostly Nachri, then Shmuel is saying, I wouldn't be mifakech alav et agal. So that contradicts what Shmuel said earlier, that b'pikuach nefesh lo hachu achar rov. And so the Gemara answers, Ki itmar d'Shmuel aresha itmar. Im rov goyim goy amar Shmuel inyan pikuach nefesh ein okay. So the Gemara answers, no. When Shmuel said l'fakech alav et agal, it wasn't on the second part of the Mishnah that said Im rov Yisrael. It was on the part that said Im rov goyim goy. I'm leaving it at that, but we'll flesh it out a little bit more next time. And then when we finish, God willing, next time, then we'll look at the Rambam and we'll look at the Shulchan Aruch, and you'll see how Rishonim dealt with this as because it, as remote as this sounds, it really does have practical implications for halacha. That's it for now. Any last questions or comments? Okay.
Good night.
Good night. Get some good rest. I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.